Welcome to the Blue Security Podcast, a weekly podcast for information security defenders, where we bring you discussions on best practices, tools, and implementation for enterprise security. Now, here are your hosts for today's show, Andy Jha and Adam Brewer.
Welcome to another episode of the Blue Security Podcast. I'm Andy, your host.
I'm Adam, your co-host.
So welcome to a new year. You should have already listened to our InfoSec News update. This one is really interesting. So if you're looking to improve your cybersecurity posture at your company, there's some really great guidance out there. One of the things that I found is CISA has, we've talked on the show about CISA and the great work that they're doing at that agency. They have a new project called the Scuba Project. The government and military, they love these acronyms. So it stands for Secure Cloud Business Applications, which provides guidance and capability to secure really the federal agencies. The guidance is here for federal agencies, but definitely can be used as a guide for your organization, even if you're not in the federal space. So it's to help secure the cloud business application environments and protect federal information. So as part of this, looking back on some of the guidance that has been put out, really it started in 2021 when the executive order 14028 for improving the nation's cybersecurity was issued. And we talked about that at the time. And then based on that, CISA came out with some zero trust maturity model. And this is a continuation where it gives you very prescriptive guidance on a security configuration baseline. So there's a few of them. First of all, they have a Microsoft 365 secure configuration baseline, which was made public and finalized in November of 2024. The Google Workspace secure configuration baselines were published on October 15th. And there's also a hybrid identity solutions guidance document that was finalized and published on March 12th of 2024 last year. So these three things together can give you a really good baseline on how to approach your cybersecurity. For Microsoft, there's specific prescriptive guidance on security configuration baselines for Defender for Office, Entra, Exchange Online, SharePoint, and OneDrive, Power BI, Power Platform, and Teams. And these are all finalized. And we're going to talk about some of them later on. For Google Workspace, there's configuration baselines for Groups for Business, Gmail, Google Calendars, Google Chat, Google Common Controls, Classroom, Drive and Docs, Meet, and Sites. Now, right now, the Google Workspace stuff hasn't been finalized. CISA is requesting feedback on the business impact of these controls, implementation, and any type of adoption blockers. The public comment period ends on February 2nd of 2025. CISA is going to be reviewing those comments. And then the hybrid identity solutions guidance. This is extremely long. I did just a scan of the document and it's phenomenal. There's primary recommendations, and I'm just going to read some of these recommendations because this was right at the top. And now, again, this is for the federal agencies that CISA is trying to help secure. This is guidance for them, but you can take this, again, for your organization. CISA recommends that agencies plan to migrate to cloud-based passwordless authentication via either their existing investments in public key infrastructure or personal identity verification, which is a PIV, or a common access card or CAC card, to authenticate to identity services or leverage FIDO2 and web authentication standards. They also recommend that agencies transition from traditional on-premise federation-based approaches to cloud primary authentication approaches using modern authenticators and open standard protocols that rely on cloud services for their primary source of identity when authenticating users and entities for most access needs. And then they have a nice statement here, which is something that Adam and I talk about all the time. CISA recognizes that this identity transition is a journey. So agencies should leverage existing resources and infrastructure to support the transition over time. The continued modernization of federal enterprises provide opportunities for agencies to incorporate modern identity and access management solutions that can improve user experience while enhancing their security posture more broadly. phish-resistant MFA, open standards protocol like FIDO2 and OpenID Connect, OAuth in SSL, reduce reliance on passwords, and fine-grained access controls that leverage contextual-based attributes on a per-request basis, supporting the federal adoption of zero trust principles. And then in the document itself, there's further guidance on architecture for hybrid solutions. It kind of goes over authentication options, whether you're federated or you're doing pass-through auth, password synchronization, cloud only. Each one of these sections has implementation and security considerations. There's MFA and SSO options. And then finally, they end with FIDO2 and passkeys. So it is a deep dive on identity and hybrid solutions and how you need to move based on these primary recommendations to cloud-based and passwordless authentication. So really good stuff. It's going to be in the link that I provide in the show notes, but definitely worth if you are maybe a laggard or thinking about moving to some of these more modern protocols. It's worth the read. It's really good.
I was kind of jumping out of my seat as Andy and I were going through the show notes pre-show, and I saw this section on the hybrid identity solutions guidance. In particular, seeing CISA call out agencies should plan to migrate to cloud-based passwordless authentication is huge. To migrate away from traditional on-premises federated-based models to cloud primary authentication. It's not that it's unexpected. It's not that it goes against or cuts against current guidance. Just seeing it spelled out there in black and white saying, you should do this, this is our guidance, is just awesome. Because we have been talking about on this show since the birth of our show, one of the very first major cybersecurity incidents that happened was the SolarWinds incident. And one of the major outcomes of that were the attackers were compromising on-premises federated identity infrastructure and using that to mint access tokens to cloud services with elevated permissions. And it was an extra risk. Not only did it link your on-premises environment to your cloud environment, allowing lateral movement for attackers, but it was just more attack surface that you are responsible for securing instead of letting somebody who's really good at it and does it at scale do it for you. And so seeing this guidance now come to fruition multiple years later is exciting because this is the right approach. You should not be in the business of identity any more than you have to be. You should let the major cloud scale providers, your Pings, Oktas, and Microsofts of the world do it for you. They do it better than you ever could. And that's not an attack on you. It's just that's not your core competency. And when you have the benefit of scale and scope, you can see those proverbial needles in the haystack. So this is just awesome. And as they call out on here, and we've heard this so many times that it's easy to like gloss over it. But one of the things is when you implement these kind of identity practices, and I'm trying to find the exact language on here, they improve user experience while enhancing security posture more broadly. I know the horse is dead and you're sick of me saying it, but these are better user experience and more secure at the same time. And it's so rare we get those wins. Why not go take this win for your organization, for how you are perceived as a security organization inside your company, as we're going to make this less painful, more streamlined, and more secure. Take the gosh darn win, and here's a chance to do it. So really exciting on the identity guidance in particular.
Yeah, and so taking that a step further, on December 17th of 2024, just a few weeks ago, CISA issued a Binding Operational Directive, or a BOD 25-01, which is now specifically guidance on how to implement secure practices. So the Scuba project was, overarching. It has this hybrid identity, it has this Google Workspace, and then it has Microsoft. This Binding Operational Directive tells the agencies specific, consistent, effective, and manageable cloud security configurations, as well as assessment tools that allow the agencies and CISA to improve the security. So this Binding Operational Directive requires all federal, civilian, executive branch agencies to comply with a defined set of these secure cloud baselines, deploy automated configuration assessment tools to check compliance, and to remediate deviations from these policies. And here's the fun part here. Although BOD 25-01 only requires action by federal civilian agents, executive branch agencies. CISA strongly recommends all stakeholders implement these policies and leverage CISA's Scuba assessment tool and the information on this page. Doing so will significantly reduce risk and enhance collective resilience across the cybersecurity community. So there you have it. Like, really anyone can take these set of guidances and implement it, and you have a great starting baseline is what I would say.
People ask for this all the time, Andy, right? When we're talking to customers,
all the time.
Customers are always like, hey, I just want some really prescriptive guidance on how I should harden my 5 environment. And, you know, Andy and I both work for Microsoft. We're in our field security sales, although we do the show on our own time and on our own dime. But when we're talking to customers, we can recommend things like through their unified agreement to have a unified support engineer come in and walk through some configuration baselines and some recommendations we have. But if you want something maybe outside of Microsoft or with a different purview, here's CISA publishing very prescriptive guidance. And we'll get into some examples in a second. But people ask for this all the time. And so if you've been asking for this, you want something to measure yourself against, here you go. You now can compare your M365 configuration, your Defender for Office configuration, your Entra configuration against these recommendations. And of course, they publish some for Google Workspace as well. So it's not just Microsoft centric, but again, that's what we know because it's our day job.
Yeah. And I know that you had mentioned it in the pre-show when we were talking about it, but I'm also thinking about different customers that I have worked with, specifically one right now, that I'm probably going to just give them this because we do have examples like for like conditional access. If you go to the Learn documentation, we have a few like recommended policies, but this is like, you will do this. So here's some examples. We'll get into it here. First and foremost, they label each one of these controls. You can think of it like a compliance, a control, like a thing you have to pass for regulations. So MSAAD-1, -1V1. So each one of these are MSAAD. So for Entra, legacy authentication shall be blocked. I mean, that's an easy one. Mm-hmm. So you can look at different applications that are still using legacy authentication. You can just create a conditional access policy. I do understand that legacy authentication sometimes still happens, but in this one, CISA saying it shall be blocked. There is no like if, ands, or buts. It's just it shall be blocked. Now you can take that as guidance and then scope very specific conditional access around an application that you might need still for legacy authentication, but the guidance says here shall be blocked. Users detected as high risk shall be blocked. Sign-ins detected as high risk shall be blocked. Those are pretty standard, pretty easy. Phishing resistant MFA shall be enforced for all users. I found this one really interesting, but then they have other ones that kind of talk about, if you can't enforce it or have not been enforced. So if phishing resistant MFA has not been enforced, then alternative MFA shall be enforced for all users. So MFA is a must for all users. And if phishing resistant MFA has not been enforced, the Microsoft Authenticator is enabled and shall be configured to show login context information. And so that's like where it's an option within the MFA to show like the location of the request of the sign-in, the application of the sign-in. It gives you additional information for the user to see whether or not, did I actually just sign into something that required an MFA?
You're trying to sign in from Minneapolis, Minnesota into Exchange Online. Is this really you?
Correct. Yeah. So, it's not the end all be all because ISPs, have a bunch of different egress networks, especially if you're signing in from like a phone or something like that. The cellular ISPs have egress points that are all over the United States, but it gives you something. So if it shows up as like Iran, as an MFA, context, then you're probably like, no, that's probably not me. So, these are all shall be done, right? Phishing a resistant MFA shall be required for highly privileged roles. Only administrators shall be allowed to register applications. So you can take this and literally go down the list and check it off. And each one of these, if you go to it, they will tell you, if you click on the actual one, it'll tell you the implementation on like where to go in the menu, this checkbox, so on and so forth. So like looking at Microsoft Defender, there's some really interesting ones there too. Standard and strict preset security policies shall be enabled. All users shall be added to Exchange Online protection in either the standard or strict preset security policy, all users shall be added to Defender for Office 365 protection in either the standard or strict preset security policies. So, looking at, again, very prescriptive for all of Defender. The Exchange Online, I also found pretty interesting. There's some SPF policies shall be published for each domain. A DMARC policy shall be published for every second level domain, so on and so forth. Stuff like automatic forwarding to external domains shall be disabled. External sender warnings shall be implemented. And these don't really like beat around the bush. It's not, these are all shall or shall nots, which in, government terms is you will do this or you won't do this. And that's it. There's no in between on any of these teams. There's a couple ones like anonymous users shall not be enabled to start meetings. External access for users shall be enabled on a per domain basis. In SharePoint and OneDrive, external sharing for SharePoint shall be limited to existing guests or only people in your organization. So this is just a great blueprint for anyone who's struggling on where to start, or maybe you can use it as a review, to make sure that you do have some of these policies in place. But just a great list of very prescriptive guidance as a baseline. And I think if you do this, you're already at a great starting point, and then, you can further tighten it down as needed.
Yeah, this is awesome. I know we're kind of like fanboying out over here, but it's been a long time coming, right? I mean, as long as these services have been around, and yes, there've been other security baselines posted over the years from other organizations. CIS has some of this sort of thing as well, but it's nice to see this as an outcome of many of the things we've talked about for years on this show now, going back to these executive orders in 21 and seeing them all the way through. Government does move slow. Yes, but it does move forward, and we can see the result of that now. And this is overall still timely, still relevant, still useful, and still will be a net positive for securing federal infrastructure, as well as, again, civilian infrastructure certainly can make use of this. And Andy, you mentioned, and I plan to as well, I will be sharing this with my customers. I have some customers who are not following much of this guidance today. I recently talked to a customer who is still completely on-premises identity, ADFS, and the whole bit. And they stunned me when I was like, well, of course you plan to migrate to cloud-based identity. And they're like, no, we don't have any plans to change anything. We're good. And I don't mean to send this as like a gotcha, but it's nice to have some weight behind it, saying, yeah, it's not just the sales guy at Microsoft telling you this. This is literally CISA, as part of the federal government, requiring federal agencies under their purview to make this move. Your critical infrastructure provider, maybe you should consider following along, even if you don't have a regulatory requirement to do it, because it's good practice to align to some of those other agencies and what they're doing. So definitely, again, super interesting. And if you're maybe a security engineer inside your organization, you're having trouble affecting change, being able to point to something like this is always helpful as well. When the government is perceived as kind of moving slow and being late to adopt things, by the time they're saying to do something, like, it's time. And really, again, this guidance, as much as I'm painting it as, well, hey, this took a while to come out, it took 3 years and government moves slow, like, this is still very modern, forward-looking guidance. It's not like we're looking at this and saying, man, you can tell it took them 5 years to get around to this because it's already out of date. Like, no, this is not out of date. This is still really, really good. And I think that's what Andy and I are so excited about, is it's rare you see something go through the winding process of bureaucracy and emerge the other side and still be highly timely and relevant like you got here. And that's really cool.
The other thing I really like about this is that the list is not super long, right? This is easily doable. Like I think for identity is the longest list of prescriptive guidance, but for Defender and Exchange Online, there's not that many. It's like 10 things. For Teams, it's like 5. So this is easily, like, you can do this probably within a couple of weeks, in your organization. At least review it.
You can audit it, in a day.
Yeah.
I mean, you're walking through these, and again, you and I know this stuff a little better than most people, but like, I'm literally, in my brain, I can map to where every single one of these settings are, because they're not buried. Like, these are very top level settings in the admin consoles, and I know where they all are. I could audit every setting you have on here, Andy, I could go in my demo tenant and audit all of these in an afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe that's a little aggressive, but just in terms of auditing and getting a readout on current state, it's not onerous, to your point.
Yeah, and this is easily doable, and then scope a project around it to start implementing some of the ones that you might be missing. Yeah, and so it's not a super long list. That's why I really like it, and some of these things are things that we recommend as security professionals to our customers all the time. So this is, again, great stuff. The link for this BOD, this binding order 2501, will be in the show notes as well. So there's two different links. One is just kind of the overall Scuba project with also links to each one of these configurations, but then the BOD is specific to Microsoft. The Gmail stuff or the Google Workspace stuff is also really good. There's just still taking comments on it. I'm assuming that once it's finalized, they're going to come out with another binding order as well, specifically for Google Workspace. But if you go to the Scuba project, you can download or redirect to each one of these secure configuration recommendations for Google Workspace. And so you can take a look at that. And then, of course, the hybrid identity solution, which we talked about. Really great read for anyone who's an IAM administrator, anyone who's interested in identity. If you haven't moved to full cloud-based, passwordless authentication, take a look at it, because it goes through a lot of different security configurations, implementation configurations, considerations, and it's just overall just really good material. To me, I'm in awe that we have an agency. We've come so far, I think, in cybersecurity, that we have this great agency that is putting out phenomenal guidance and documentation. I think that, I had heard, there's rumors that the upcoming administration might get rid of CISA, which I think would be a huge detriment to our national security, because some of the stuff that they're doing is just phenomenal.
I'm going to be cautiously optimistic that even with all of the talk around that, I think anybody can clearly see this as too much of a positive net impact on national security to let go. So fingers crossed there, but agree. CISA's done phenomenal work, and I already alluded to the points, so I won't repeat it too much, but I'm just amazed at the fact that it's timely, relevant, actionable. It's terrific guidance. It's not traditional government gobbledygook, bureaucracy, so slow it's not relevant. Like, it's not walking you through how to configure your ADFS environment for certificate-based authentication or anything. It's really modern and good. I mean, by the way, I'm not hating on CBA, because CBA is still a great technology to this day. If you've got all the PKI stood up and everything, heck, use it. It's great. Very strong, very secure. So anyhow, not hating on that, but just saying it's cool to see such forward-looking guidance.
All right, so we will have the links in the show notes. Definitely take a look. This is something I'm going to be sending to my customers. I know, Adam, you plan on sending. So take a look at it. That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching and listening as always. Our contact information will be in the show notes if you have any questions or topics you want us to talk about in the future. Thanks. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Security Podcast. Please check out the show notes, catch up on episodes you may have missed, and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Find Andy on Twitter @AJaw0 and Adam @AJ Brewer. See you at our next episode.